Hello everyone, my name is Quinn and today I'm going to be taking you through the process of creating this Chomper grenade from Arcane. Anyone who knows me knows that basically I have a bit of an obsession with Arcane, and it was only halfway through doing the 3D model for this that I actually decided that I wanted to turn this into a video and, document the entire process from start to finish. Now, here you see me creating all the little nuts that go on the base bit. This is also quite a good bit because what I can do is I can set up, the feet, I guess, of the model so that it stands up on its own steam and I don't have to kind of build anything extra on it. I then started extruding out the sections where obviously it all slots together, so the bit that twists, if I was kind of wanting to, I could turn it into like a, wind up and then it could start, the egg timer element of it, but I decided on this first one I was just going to make it as it is out of the models, and this is really one of my first times using Blender properly. I dabble in it, I don't ever kind of complete a project with Blender. I just kind of start, do a few bits and pieces and then finish. But this will be my first project where I've gone completely from basically scratch and worked it all the way through to project completion. So this is quite an exciting one for me. And as you can see, I have, I'm working my way through. I'm obviously going off of a couple of source images on a second monitor, just making it a little bit squatter than some of the ones I see, because I feel like a grenade, it needs to be just a little bit more on the squat side. Now, obviously, if you want to see the full process of this, not sped up, by all means drop me a comment and I'll post this separately. But obviously here, you can see me finishing up the model, putting it onto the print plate, and then basically, kind of from there, we move on to printing. Now, immediately while I was printing, I was noticing that my prints just weren't looking great. They've never looked great on my printer, but all of a sudden it started getting really, really bad. I posted something on Reddit basically just saying, does anyone know what's wrong with my printer? And someone came back and immediately said, oh yeah, your printer's over extruding. So I went through all my settings, had a look, and it turned out my printer was actually under extruding. So as I was obviously in the process of organising it and resyncing it, I discovered that part of my printer was actually broken, and clearly had been for quite some time, because I found this part, which I'm showing on the screen, as just not attached to the machine. So I have clearly been using a broken printer for a while now. Bought a new part for it, decided to swap this part out. Coda decided she wanted to throw a ball at me, and you can see how cold it is in my workshop by the plumes of breath coming off of her as she decides that she wants to play with her ball with me. And then back onto it, I removed the plastic kind of rubbishy extruder and basically attached on a brand new aluminium one. I can't recommend enough putting metal parts onto your printer, because as soon as I put it on and just recalibrated it, the printer worked beautifully and enabled me to just start getting on printing my models. Now, obviously once all the models were printed out, it was then time to basically pull them all apart, take them all off of their build plates. Now, obviously where I had been under extruding, I had been slightly over extruding on this, so they were kind of stuck to the build plate a lot more. So here I am, kind of pulling them all apart, getting everything off of the print beds. I was using a 30% infill to try and make sure that the models were quite solid, and I used tree supports, which obviously enabled me to, quickly pull a lot of these bits and pieces off, and also maintain, a good print time, because I think all in all this took about 48 hours to print. I had to sand down some of the parts, getting all to a position where I could actually, fit them all together, because I'd made them slightly too close, which is something I can definitely pay attention to in the future. And then basically, once I'd kind of got it to that position, I needed to drill all the holes for the bolts and the screws that really hold everything together. So I grabbed a little bit of wood, grabbed my drill. Now, I know a lot of people wince when people start drilling 3D models and 3D prints, but I thought I don't see any reason why not. I'd kind of allowed for it. I put little dots onto my prints in places so I know where I'm supposed to be drilling them. I worked my way across. I know I'm doing it a little bit jankily, but unfortunately my clamps aren't exactly the best. So all I do is I basically drill the holes, make them a little bit bigger so I can put a screw through. Next, put these together, lined up the holes, and then found a couple of screws and just used my fingers to screw them in, and then, make sure that they could then open and close. The next part, I then obviously just kind of lined it up whether I wanted them to be drilled on, screwed into the model itself, and kind of pulled them out a little bit, and then kind of offered it up just to see whether or not this has worked, because at this stage it was still very up in the air as to whether or not I had done a good job here, and I was a little bit worried. But it seemed to have worked, so the next thing I did was I just put a couple of pilot holes into the model that I could then put those screws into. So I did one on one side, and I did another one on the other side. And then basically I offered it up, attached it on, and just did a quick test screw to ensure that everything went together nicely. And ratchet screwdrivers here are incredibly useful. So the jaws opened and closed easily, and then it was then time to slot everything together and have a basic idea about how big the model was going to be, but also just a little bit of weight to it as well. As you can see, it looks beautiful. It's time to move on. I then apply these little bolts to attach the handle of the grenade onto the grenade itself, mainly because I didn't have the right bolts. Made sure that my drill bit was the right size, attached that on, and I drilled a hole through where the bolt was going to go. And then I opened up the hole to the right size with a larger drill piece. Next, I did the same with the handle itself. I started with a pilot hole, obviously ensuring to use a bit of wood to back it up, and then I used the larger tool to just make the holes so that the bolt goes through a little bit easier. And this time I just flipped it over to do the second hole. Then I could slot that on, attach that in, and as if by magic, it went through beautifully. Now, because the bolt itself was a little bit too long and I couldn't get the right size bolt for it from my local hardware shop, I just needed to cut the bolt down. So all I just did was I took a little bit of Sharpie, marked out where it needed to be cut, attached it to my bench vise thing, and then cut my way through the bolt, which took a little bit of encouragement. Then I just reattached the bolt on, ensuring that it was the right size for that part of the model. The next job I needed to do was put the larger bolts in. Now, on both sides of the model there are two larger flat-headed bolts. Now, I originally tried printing these out, but I didn't like the appearance of the bolt themselves, so I decided instead I was going to use a couple of actual physical metal bolts. I was going to drill a hole, which I then obviously put a little bit of tape so I could get the depth correct, and then I was going to screw these bolts in. So obviously I used a little bit of narrow frog tape, marked out the length of the bolt on the drill bit, and then once I drill this through, I can then go up to where the frog tape is, and I know I've got the correct depth. This enabled me to then push them in as far as they go, and then obviously I could then screw them in or push them in depending on which one it was. I had a few parts that I'd printed out separately, which I then wanted to glue on. These were parts that obviously I couldn't get a nice enough finish on if I just printed it out normally, so these are pieces that I would have much preferred, and as I did, to print them out flat to the base and then basically glue them on afterwards, which I glued on with my very steady hands, trying not to glue myself to the model, adding a little bit of extra glue to the model itself, and then just sticking it on carefully, making sure it was at the right angle. Now at this stage I did take a little bit of a time lapse, hoping to see something happen with the glue, but unfortunately it didn't, so we moved directly on to the next bit, which is where we attach the little handle the same way with the glue, attaching the little handle right to the top, a little bit of glue, trying to avoid the stringing there. I just collected it up, wiped it off, and then glued it onto the top. Next thing I needed to drill was the grenade pin. Now, I imagine this as you pull the grenade pin out, which then enable the teeth to start chattering, which is obviously where I imagined would start the timer. So I thought that the grenade pin needed to be through the mouth, obviously holding it in place. So here I basically drilled a hole using the smallest drill bit, obviously worked it out the exact line that I needed it to be on, grabbed a bit of a larger drill bit, and then drilled this hole, matching this hole in with a separate bit of the model that I had printed out as well, which obviously would work as our pin. And I'm being very careful here to not damage the model or do any kind of wonky drilling. So I take that out, and then I grab the little pin, but I've already just slotted the key ring through, and there you have it. And with that, the base of the model is finished and is now ready to get on with some painting. Now this is a part of the video where I may have just had a complete breakdown. I'm not entirely sure what happened, because I do remember recording all my footage of spray painting, but then I just don't have it. So we're going to have to go straight in here, where I started kind of buffing on the silver paint, making it look a little bit more metallic. Now, what I'd done as a base coat was I'd done 2 coats of high fill primer, obviously filling out any gaps and all that kind of stuff, and then obviously I put a new black layer on so that I could then kind of make this metallic effect. What I then did was I started dry brushing on this metallic. So obviously I dipped it into the paint and I wiped it off onto some kitchen roll, and then basically I then started painting it, but obviously using as much off of the brush as possible, not re-dipping and not kind of filling the brush. This dry brushing effect is something I've never actually done before, but I do think it's something that I think I'll do in the future. I did quite enjoy it. I liked the effect that it kind of gave off. And, you know, after researching a lot of different videos to try and kind of figure out what other people were doing, I then felt comfortable to give it a try on my own model. So you can see what I'm doing again here is I'm dipping the paint, I'm then brushing it off, and then I'm grabbing the big model, and this is where I then start getting on with kind of dry brushing the entire model itself. Now, the base coat is obviously just a silver kind of Aldi paint. It doesn't have to be anything special, because obviously, you know, at the end of the day, kind of the more imperfect that it looks, I feel like the kind of better it is. Obviously the whole point of Jinx, you know, she's not a perfectionist as such. She kind of, you know, she draws it on how she likes, she paints it, she does it, and it has that kind of imperfect perfection kind of esque look to it, and it's a little bit, you know, messy in places as well, and I really like that. So as much as I'm maybe making a few excuses for the fact my paint job isn't the greatest in the world, there is also the element of it kind of fits in with the theme that I'm going for. And as you can see, it worked out quite nicely. So next up is I wanted to get the bronze paint on, because the more I looked at source material, the more I realised that instead of it being brown, which is what I thought it was, it looked a bit more bronzy. So I decided to kind of make this section metal as well. I decided that the entire thing should be metal, so I did these bits. And then I also made the handle a bit more metal, but also I thought that the handle, being a section that was grabbed and held onto and things like that, would be a little bit more imperfect. So I've made that one a little bit more patchy in places. And finally, I got the metallic gold. This is my favourite bit, and I just highlighted over the gold bit in the middle. Now I don't know whether or not that bit is gold, but that's how we do it. Now something important to also notice is obviously with the neon colours. Now as you see, Jinx was a little bit more messy with her paint style, and obviously she was using, you know, chalks and crayons and things like that. So as much as what I've tried to do here is I've tried to emphasise with the neons the messy approach to it, while kind of keeping it looking not too perfect. You know, I'm splashing bits of paint on, I'm flicking it, and really I'm just trying to make it look as, you know, as handmade and as messy while not being messy as possible. You know, I think I've done quite a good attempt of trying to make that kind of work. I did have to go over a couple of bits a couple of times, and you know, there was a few bits that maybe I've kind of added more in than needs to be, but I think using obviously the neon paints that I've got, I think it's just given it a really good look to it, and it has really added to the feel of it, but where before it was obviously quite just metallic. Now, here's a part of the video where I really struggled with getting the colours right. I was desperately trying to make a neon blue, adding greens, neon greens, whites, blues, and then eventually, through some miracle, I actually managed to do it. So here I am adding my neon blue to the model, and although it's not an actual neon colour, it's more of like a sky blue, I think, after everything that I did, I still think it works and it matches up with the colour scheme that we're going for here. So as with the pink, I kind of flicked it, gave it a few splodges. At one point I actually loaded the brush up and just flicked it on. You can't really see it in the video, but in real life it looks pretty good. And I just generally tried to make it as, you know, I put a fingerprint on it, just in like, you know, the neon blue. I just added a few bits and pieces here and there, just generally giving it a little bit more of personality. Now obviously, you know, what we're trying to do is we're trying to emanate Jinx and, you know, the process that she went through in creating these. So obviously here we have just generally kind of touching up bits, adding extra bits, and just really having a feel for how we want this model to go. And at the end of the day, it is going to be a model that I'll have in my own house. So really, you know, it also has to have a bit of a personal touch and how I feel like this model kind of works. And as you can see, here I am just putting a couple of final, you know, touches, just adding the boom onto the side of the lower jaw, and then just put some slightly brighter colours over the top. Add a little bit of white to the neon to just give it a little bit more depth. And then basically it was then time to attach everything together. Here you can see me attaching the little key ring onto the pin again after having painted the pin. And then finally, it's time to kind of make those bolts that I've bought for it a little bit less perfect. So I've put some light rust effects on, obviously started by just putting kind of a base of some rust, you know, attach that on, try to make it look a little bit over the top because I know that I'll be wiping some of it off in a minute. And then obviously the base bit will dry, and anything that hasn't dried will then obviously be wiped off. There I just got the model a little bit. And then I put on some dark brown staining. So this is like a bit of mud, a bit of like, you know, a bit of model dirt, which then obviously once I've popped that onto the dried sections, it just gives it a little bit more of a worn look to it and just makes those perfect sections look a little bit more, makes them look a little bit less out of place. And then finally, just dabbed off any of the wet bits, leaving everything that's dry behind, giving it that final look, which you can see in the final results. Thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you again soon.